The bus shuddered as it pulled into the small-town station, the snow crunching beneath the wheels. David gazed out the frosted window, letting the familiar sight of pine trees weighed down by snow pull him into a quiet sense of relief. Home. It was strange to think of it that way again after so many years away, the word feeling both warm and distant. But he was here, back in the town he'd left years ago, and back to his daughter, Lily, who was waiting for him. He slung his worn duffel bag over his shoulder, stepping onto the icy ground. The cold air filled his lungs with a sharp freshness, a stark contrast to the humid, dusty air he'd grown used to. There was no one at the station. It was just past dawn, and most of the town would still be waking up. The stillness felt both comforting and isolating, a reminder that, despite the holiday season, he was returning to a place where memories weighed heavy. David felt his heart quicken as he turned onto the familiar street. He hadn't been back to their house, since his last brief visit. Now it was just him and Lily. As he approached, he saw the outline of the small, two-story house, the roof covered in a fresh layer of snow. A few holiday decorations were hung on the door and windows, but they looked hastily placed, as though someone had started decorating but couldn't quite bring themselves to finish. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door. Inside, the house felt still, as though it had been holding its breath, waiting for him to return. He placed his bag quietly by the door and called out Lily. From upstairs, he heard small footsteps, then saw her peeking down at him, her face uncertain and wide-eyed. She looked older than he remembered, her features more defined, though she still wore her hair in the same loose braid. He managed a soft smile, unsure of what to say. The last time he'd been home, they'd barely had time to get to know each other again before he had to leave. Now he was here to stay. But would that be enough? "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "Hey there, sweetheart." He took a few steps forward, but she didn't move. There was a distance between them he hadn't expected, and it stung more than he was prepared for. Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself to her eye level. "Missed you a lot, you know." Lily gave him a small, uncertain smile. She approached, finally, her steps cautious, before wrapping her arms around him. He could feel the tension in her small frame, as though she were still holding back. "Missed you too," she whispered. They stood there for a moment, the house silent around them, before he pulled back, looking at her carefully. "You've grown," he said, trying to sound casual. "Almost didn't recognize you." She shrugged, looking away, and he noticed her hands fidgeting. "I just wanted to make sure you'd come back this time." The words hit him harder than he'd anticipated, a reminder of how many promises had been broken along the way. He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm here now, for good," but the words felt inadequate, and a part of him wondered if she even believed them. He knew he had to prove it with more than words this time. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains in Lily's room, casting a faint glow over her bed. David stood in the hallway, unsure whether to knock. Last night had been quiet, too quiet. After they'd had dinner, she'd retreated upstairs without much to say, and he'd sat alone in the living room, the silence pressing down on him. He wanted to break through the distance between them, but it seemed like a wall had grown up around her heart since he'd left. Determined to try again, he gently knocked and waited. After a moment, the door opened a crack. Lily's face appeared, her eyes slightly red, as though she'd been crying. The sight tugged at him. "Hey, kiddo, everything okay?" She gave a small nod, but he noticed her gaze drift to the window, where snowflakes began to fall. For a moment, she seemed far away, lost in a place he couldn't reach. He wanted to ask what was wrong, but the question felt too big, too heavy to place on her young shoulders. Instead, he suggested, "How about we get the tree set up? Can't have Christmas without a tree, right?" Her face brightened slightly, and he felt a small flicker of hope. They spent the afternoon setting up the tree in the living room, untangling lights and hanging ornaments. But even as they laughed at the memories each ornament brought up, he sensed that same distant sadness in her eyes. Later that night, David sat in the living room, looking over old photo albums he'd found in a box near the attic. Lily had gone upstairs, saying she was tired, but he'd heard her footsteps lingering near the stairs a moment longer than usual. The sound tugged at him, filling him with the strange, unplaceable guilt that had lingered since he'd arrived. Deciding to check on her, he made his way upstairs, pausing outside her door when he heard her whispering. She was knelt beside the fireplace in her room, her voice soft and hopeful as she murmured, "Please, Santa. Please bring her back." David felt his chest tighten as he took in the sight of his daughter, alone in her room, making a Christmas wish that he couldn't fulfill. His heart ached, knowing that the her she spoke of was her mother. How many times had Lily knelt there, asking for something beyond his reach? And how many times had he failed to realize the depth of her longing? Stepping away, he took a breath, trying to steady himself. The weight of her innocent wish bore down on him, igniting a determination within him to give her something, anything that might ease her sadness. But what could he give her that would replace the mother she'd lost? He returned downstairs, realizing that this Christmas would be more challenging than he'd thought. If Lily's happiness meant bringing back a part of her past, then he would have to face his own, and maybe even reach out to the woman he'd left behind. The morning sun shone weakly through gray clouds as David stirred awake. The house was quiet, save for the faint creak of floorboards from upstairs. After a night filled with dreams and memories that stirred up old wounds, he felt a mix of anticipation and worry for the day ahead. Downstairs, he found Lily sitting at the kitchen table, a bowl of cereal in front of her. She looked up as he entered, her eyes bright but wary. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, Lily. Sleep okay?" He poured himself a cup of coffee, trying to sound casual. She shrugged, focusing on her cereal. "Yeah, I guess." He sipped his coffee, the warm bitterness grounding him. They were both silent, and David felt the weight of the previous night lingering between them. He wanted to bring up what he'd overheard, but the words felt stuck. After a few minutes, Lily broke the silence. "Dad, will Mom ever come back?" The question hit him like a sudden winter wind, cutting through the morning stillness. He'd known it was coming, in some way, but he hadn't expected her to be so direct. He set down his mug, his hands suddenly unsteady. "I don't know, Lily." He tried to keep his voice even, hiding the emotions that surged up. Lily's eyes stayed on him, searching for something. "I know she left because you two didn't get along, but do you think she'd come back if I asked her?" David's throat tightened. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her that things would be fine, but he also didn't want to give her false hope. The truth was he didn't know if Sarah would ever come back, not as the person Lily remembered at least. "I know you miss her," he said carefully, reaching across the table to take her small hand. "And I can't promise anything about your mom, but I can promise you this. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Lily nodded slowly, but he could see that his words didn't ease her longing. There was a part of her that wanted more, a wish that he couldn't grant. Later, as they walked through town to pick up some supplies for the house, David noticed Lily glancing at families they passed, her gaze lingering on mothers with young children. The sight sent a pang of guilt through him. He wondered if bringing up memories of her mother was doing more harm than good, or if it was exactly what she needed to begin healing. The small-town grocery store was as cozy and familiar as David remembered it, with shelves stacked high with holiday treats, pine-scented candles, and strings of lights. The bell above the door jingled as he and Lily entered, drawing a few curious glances from the customers browsing the aisles. As they walked through the store, David noticed whispers and sidelong glances from a few familiar faces. He hadn't realized how quickly news of his return would spread. In a town like this, everything was noticed, every absence, and every reappearance noted. They were halfway down the baking aisle when a woman with a warm smile approached them. "David, it's good to see you back in town. And this must be Lily." Lily gave a small, polite nod, stepping a little closer to him. David forced a smile, trying to keep his tone light. "Good to be back. Yes, this is Lily." The woman's gaze softened as she looked at Lily, then shifted back to him. "I heard about. Well, I'm sure it's good for her to have you home now. Family's so important, especially around the holidays. He could sense the curiosity behind her words, the gentle prodding to find out more about his family's situation. It made him uncomfortable, but he kept his voice steady. "Yes, it is." As they continued down the aisle, David felt a strange mix of irritation and sadness. He'd forgotten how much small towns relied on gossip to fill the quiet, and he hated the thought of his family's struggles becoming fodder for the community's conversations. But at the same time, he knew that people cared, even if their curiosity sometimes felt intrusive. At the checkout counter, an elderly man named George, who'd known David's father, gave him a nod. "Your girl looks just like her mother," George said, his voice kind but knowing. "How's she doing with everything?" David hesitated, his jaw tightening. He wanted to keep his family's matters private, but he also didn't want to appear standoffish. "She's holding up, thanks. We're just trying to enjoy the holiday together." George nodded, giving him a look of understanding. "If you ever need anything, you know where to find us." The encounter left David unsettled as they left the store. Lily noticed his silence and tugged on his sleeve. "Does everyone know about us, Dad?" He sighed, bending down to meet her eyes. "People talk, especially in a small town like this. But they care, even if it doesn't always feel that way. They mean well." Lily nodded thoughtfully, but he could see a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. They were both navigating unfamiliar terrain, each trying to find their footing in a town where everyone knew pieces of their story. Walking back through the snow-laden streets, David felt the weight of his choices and their impact on Lily. He knew they couldn't escape the past, but maybe, just maybe, they could reshape the way it lived in their lives. As they approached the house, the familiar sight of their home brought him a small sense of relief. Inside those walls, it was just the two of them, but he knew that the memories they shared, and the ones still left unsaid, would continue to press against the boundaries of their little world. The wind howled outside as David settled in his small home office, going through a few boxes he'd brought in from the attic. They were filled with family mementos, old bills, and some faded photographs. He hoped that sorting through these might help him feel a bit more grounded, like he was reclaiming some piece of his life here. At the bottom of one box, tucked beneath stacks of papers, he found a collection of envelopes tied together with a thin, fraying ribbon. He picked it up, curious, and realized these were letters, written in Lily's small, careful handwriting. The return address was their house, and each letter was addressed to her mother. He sat down heavily, running his fingers over the letters. Some were marked with smudges, as though tears had fallen on them, and the words seemed almost hesitant, like Lily had been unsure of what to say or how much to share. Reading her thoughts, her attempts to reach out, felt like intruding on her private world, but he couldn't help himself. He gently unfolded the top letter and began to read. "Dear Mom, I miss you. Dad doesn't talk about you much, and sometimes I feel like I'm forgetting what you look like. Do you miss me too? Christmas is coming up, and I really wish you could be here." Each letter contained a similar longing, an innocent hope that one day her mother might come back, that their family might be whole again. David's throat tightened as he read through them, realizing just how deeply his absence and his strained relationship with Sarah had affected Lily. She had been carrying this quiet pain alone, penning her feelings in letters that had never been sent. He felt a pang of guilt. How many nights had she cried herself to sleep, writing these words to a mother who wouldn't read them? A wave of regret washed over him, making him realize that he'd been so focused on coping with his own feelings that he hadn't seen how much his daughter needed him. Determined to be there for her, he carefully placed the letters back in the box. He would talk to her about them, but he needed to find the right words, the right moment. Later, when he was tucking her into bed, he finally asked, "Lily, do you ever write letters to Mom?" Her eyes widened slightly, and she looked away. "Sometimes. I used to. It's silly." "It's not silly at all," he said softly, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I think it's a beautiful way to remember her. And if you ever want to talk about her, you can always come to me." She looked up at him, a spark of something unreadable in her eyes. Maybe one day. They sat in silence for a moment, and he could feel the weight of her thoughts. But for the first time since he'd come home, he felt a sliver of understanding pass between them. David woke up early, his mind still filled with the thoughts and emotions stirred by Lily's letters. He hadn't been able to sleep well, haunted by the realization that he'd failed to see her pain. His relationship with Sarah had ended painfully, but he'd never fully considered how that fracture had affected Lily. Determined to confront his own feelings, he decided to reach out to Sarah. He didn't have any illusions about rekindling what they'd once shared, but maybe if they could have an honest conversation, he could finally bring some peace into his home for Lily's sake. After pacing back and forth in the living room, he picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and dialed her number. Each ring felt heavier, stretching the silence, until her voice finally came through on the other end, hesitant and almost surprised. "David." "Yeah, it's me," he said, his voice low. "I wanted to talk about Lily and everything else." There was a pause, and he could almost picture her frowning, weighing her response. "I'm not sure there's much left to talk about, David." "Maybe not, but I think Lily deserves to know more than silence between us. She's been writing letters to you." This seemed to catch her off guard. "Letters?" "Yes. I think she's struggling to make sense of everything, and I don't want her feeling like she has to pick a side." He tried to keep his tone steady, but the words felt heavy, dredging up memories he'd tried to bury. Sarah was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I never wanted her to feel that way." "Neither did I," he replied. "Look, I don't know what's left between us, if anything. But for her sake, maybe we can give her some sense of closure. She deserves that much." "I'll think about it," Sarah said finally, the reluctance clear in her tone. "But I can't make any promises." He knew it was the best he could hope for right now. After they hung up, he sat in the quiet, the weight of their conversation lingering like a ghost in the room. That evening, when Lily noticed him deep in thought, she asked, "Did you talk to Mom?" David hesitated, but nodded. "I did, sweetheart. She knows you've been thinking about her." Lily looked at him with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Will she come home?" "I don't know, Lily, but we're both here for you, in our own ways." He offered her a reassuring smile, hoping it would be enough, even if it felt like a fragile promise. As Lily went to bed that night, David felt the walls of their home almost hum with the memories and conversations left unsaid. He knew it would take time, but maybe, just maybe, reaching out to Sarah was a step toward healing, for both him and Lily. The days slipped by quietly, winter settling deeper over the town as Christmas approached. David was determined to create new memories for Lily, something joyful and grounding to counterbalance the weight of the past. He knew he couldn't fill every void, but maybe, just maybe, he could give her something to hold on to. "Lily," he called one morning, catching her just as she was about to go upstairs. "I was thinking we could decorate the house together. Really go all out this year." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Really?" "Yeah, why not?" He smiled, trying to ease the tension that still lingered between them. "I'll let you pick the decorations. We could make some cookies too. Your choice." Her face lit up, and he felt a glimmer of warmth at seeing her so genuinely happy. They spent the afternoon digging through old boxes and finding bits and pieces of Christmas decorations he'd forgotten they even had. Tinsel ornaments, half-melted candles, and strings of tangled lights emerged from dusty storage bins, each one holding a hint of past Christmases. As they worked, Lily paused over a small ornament, a simple, hand-painted star. She held it gingerly, her expression softening. "Mom helped me make this one," she murmured, almost to herself. David watched her, feeling the familiar ache of his own memories. He wanted to reach out, to say something that would make the moment easier for her, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he simply knelt beside her, offering a gentle smile. "Let's put it at the top of the tree," he suggested. Her smile was faint, but real. Together, they placed the star carefully, Lily climbing onto a step stool while he steadied her, each of them holding a side. The house began to take on a new warmth, the small, colorful lights casting a cozy glow against the walls. Later, as they baked cookies, he noticed her laughing more freely, her shoulders losing some of their usual tension. He realized how long it had been since he'd seen her so relaxed, and it filled him with a quiet hope. Maybe he was doing something right, even if it was only a small step. As they cleaned up, Lily looked at him with a shy smile. "This was fun, Dad. Can we do this every Christmas?" "Absolutely," he said, his voice filled with more certainty than he'd felt in a long time. "Every Christmas." They stayed up late, the living room filled with the smell of cookies and the soft flicker of lights. David felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known he'd missed. He knew the holiday wouldn't solve everything, but for now, it felt like enough. The house was a quiet haven, decorated with all the little touches that Lily had chosen. Each ornament, every candle, seemed to have its place, filling the space with a kind of nostalgic beauty. As David looked around, he felt proud of how they transformed the home, making it feel alive and festive. One evening, as they sat together in the glow of the tree, David remembered an old photo album he'd seen while searching through the attic. He excused himself, climbing up to retrieve it. The album was worn, its leather cover cracked and faded, but it held years of memories within its pages. Returning to the living room, he settled beside Lily and opened the album. Her eyes widened as she saw the photos of herself as a toddler, bundled in winter coats, clinging to his hand, or snuggled up between him and Sarah. Each picture seemed to bring a new question, a fresh curiosity about the life they'd once shared as a family. "Who took this one?" she asked, pointing to a picture of herself sitting on a picnic blanket, a big grin on her face. "Your mom did," David replied softly, his mind drifting back to that day. "She loved taking pictures of you, said she wanted to capture every moment." As they turned the pages, Lily grew quiet, her fingers tracing the edges of each photo. "She looks so happy here. Why did things change?" David hesitated, unsure of how much to say. He didn't want to tarnish her memories, but he also knew that avoiding the truth wouldn't help her. He sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people grow apart. It doesn't mean they don't care about each other. It just means their paths go in different directions." He looked at her, hoping his explanation would be enough. She nodded slowly, seeming to absorb his words. "Did you ever think about getting back together?" The question hung in the air, heavy and complex. He hadn't expected her to be so direct, and stirred emotions he'd kept buried. He reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I think we both wanted the best for you, but sometimes loving someone means knowing when to let go. And that's not easy." Lily seemed to mull over his answer, her gaze drifting back to the album. They continued flipping through the pages, their silence comfortable, yet filled with unspoken thoughts. Each image was a reminder of the life they'd built, one that had been both beautiful and painful. As they reached the end of the album, Lily looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you for showing me this, Dad. It makes me feel like I can remember the good parts." He smiled, a soft, bittersweet feeling settling in his chest. "Those memories are yours to keep, sweetheart. Always." They sat together, the room filled with the quiet hum of the Christmas lights. David felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he was helping Lily find a way to reconcile her memories with the present. He knew it wasn't the same as having her mother there, but for now, sharing these pieces of the past seemed to be enough. As Christmas drew closer, David found himself wondering if his conversation with Sarah had made any difference. He knew that reaching out to her was a step toward healing, but he wasn't sure it would bring the closure Lily needed. Still, the thought lingered, nagging at him as he tried to focus on making the holiday special for his daughter. One evening, just as he was preparing dinner, his phone rang. He picked it up, his heart skipping a beat when he saw Sarah's name on the screen. Taking a deep breath, he answered. "Hello?" "Hi, David," she replied, her voice hesitant. "I've been thinking about what you said about Lily and everything." A surge of mixed emotions ran through him, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm glad to hear that." There was a pause, and he could sense her hesitation. "I've been considering coming to town, just for Christmas. I thought maybe it would be good for Lily to see me, even if it's just for a short time." David swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. He knew this was what Lily wanted, a chance to see her mother again, to feel whole even if just for a moment. But it also meant reopening old wounds, bringing memories and emotions he wasn't sure he was ready to face. For Lily, I think it will mean a lot, he replied softly. She's been missing you. Sarah's sigh was barely audible. I've missed her too. And maybe it's time to try and be there for her, even if it's not the way I used to be. They arranged for her to arrive a few days before Christmas. After they hung up, David stood in the quiet, absorbing the reality of her visit. He knew this wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but rather a chance for Lily to see her parents together, even if it was only temporary. That night, he found Lily in her room, carefully wrapping presents she'd made herself. She looked up when he entered, a curious light in her eyes. "What's up, Dad?" He smiled, sitting beside her on the bed. "I have some news. Your mom, she's coming to visit for Christmas." Lily's eyes widened, her face brightening with a mixture of disbelief and joy. "Really?" "Yes, really," he replied, feeling a pang of emotion at the hope in her voice. "She'll be here soon." Lily hugged him tightly, and he could feel her happiness radiating through her small frame. It was a moment of relief for both of them, a glimpse of the Christmas they'd both been hoping for. As he held her, he made a silent promise to himself. Whatever happened when Sarah arrived, he would make sure Lily felt loved and supported. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. David wanted everything to be perfect for Lily, especially now that Sarah would be joining them. He tidied up the house, carefully arranging the decorations and making sure every corner felt welcoming and festive. Even though he didn't know what to expect from Sarah's visit, he was determined to create a warm environment for Lily's sake. One morning, he noticed Lily humming to herself as she hung ornaments on the tree, her excitement for her mother's arrival evident in her every move. Seeing her so happy filled him with a mix of pride and nostalgia. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her so animated, and it gave him hope that this Christmas would be a turning point for all of them. "Dad, do you think Mom will like the tree?" Lily asked, adjusting one of the ornaments. "I think she'll love it," he assured her. "You've done an amazing job." They spent the day cooking and baking, filling the house with the warm aroma of gingerbread and sugar cookies. Lily insisted on making a special batch for her mother, carefully decorating each cookie with icing and sprinkles. Watching her focus on each detail, David realized how much this meant to her, a chance to show her mother the life she'd been building without her, to reconnect in a way that felt both familiar and new. As they worked, David couldn't shake a quiet sense of unease. While he was glad Sarah would be there for Lily, he couldn't ignore the emotions it stirred within him. He remembered their arguments, the hurt that had lingered long after she'd left. But he also remembered the good times, the laughter they'd shared during those early years. Part of him wondered if they'd ever truly healed from their separation, or if those wounds would always remain. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, David sat alone in the living room, staring at the twinkling lights on the tree. The room felt empty, yet filled with memories. He knew he'd have to face those memories when Sarah arrived, to confront the past even if it was painful. The next morning, he took Lily aside and gently prepared her for her mother's visit. "You know, Lily, when your mom arrives, it might feel different from how you remember. People change, and sometimes things don't go exactly as we hope. But no matter what, I want you to know that we both love you very much." Lily nodded thoughtfully, her face growing serious. "I understand, Dad. I just want us to be together." He hugged her tightly, knowing that he couldn't promise her the perfect family she wanted. But he could give her something close to it, a memory she could hold on to even if it was only for this Christmas. As they finished preparing the house, David caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. He looked tired, but there was a quiet resolve in his reflection. This was for Lily, he reminded himself, a chance to create something beautiful for her, to give her a Christmas filled with love and warmth. And as he looked around at the decorated tree, the freshly baked cookies and the festive lights, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could help them all find a way forward. The day of Sarah's arrival was gray and cold, snow gently falling as David and Lily waited at the train station. Lily bounced on her heels, her excitement barely contained, while David stood beside her, trying to calm his nerves. He kept reminding himself that this was for Lily, but the reality of seeing Sarah after so long stirred emotions he'd carefully buried. When the train finally pulled in, David's heart raced. As the passengers began to step off, he spotted her, Sarah, wrapped in a long coat, her familiar gaze sweeping the crowd until it rested on them. She looked older, but still had that same spark in her eyes. For a brief moment, they simply stared at each other, both uncertain of how to bridge the years of silence. "Mom." Lily's voice broke the spell as she rushed forward, throwing her arms around Sarah. "Lily." Sarah's face softened as she hugged her daughter tightly. David could see tears in her eyes as she held onto Lily, the emotions overwhelming them both. David approached slowly, feeling a mix of relief and discomfort. When Sarah looked up, she gave him a small, tentative smile. "Hello, David." "Sarah." He managed a nod, unsure of what else to say. The words felt inadequate, a reminder of the distance that now separated them. The three of them walked to the car in a somewhat awkward silence, with Lily chattering excitedly about the decorations and the cookies they'd baked. David drove, glancing occasionally at Sarah through the rearview mirror, watching her as she listened to Lily's stories. She seemed quieter than he remembered, her eyes taking in every detail, as if trying to reconnect with a life she'd left behind. Back at the house, Sarah looked around, her expression a mixture of nostalgia and melancholy. "You kept everything the same," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. David nodded. Lily wanted it that way. They spent the evening exchanging small talk, careful not to let their conversations stray too far into the past. David could sense Sarah's hesitation, her reluctance to address the memories lingering in every corner of the house. They focused on Lily, who was thrilled to have her mother there, her laughter filling the room and easing some of the tension. But as the night wore on, David felt the strain of maintaining a facade. They were all dancing around the unspoken, the years of separation and hurt that had shaped their lives. He knew they couldn't avoid it forever, but for now, he kept his focus on making this reunion as smooth as possible for Lily's sake. When it was time for bed, Lily hugged Sarah tightly, her happiness radiating through the house. "I'm so glad you're here, Mom." Sarah smiled, her voice thick with emotion. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." As David watched them, he felt a strange mix of contentment and apprehension. This was what Lily needed, a moment of family unity, however brief. But he also knew that this reunion would force them to confront old wounds, and that he and Sarah would need to face their own truths for Lily's sake. The next morning, the air was heavy with tension that lingered beneath the surface, like cracks in a thin layer of ice. Lily had insisted on making breakfast for her parents, filling the kitchen with the smell of pancakes and syrup. David and Sarah exchanged small smiles, both touched by her efforts to bring them together. After breakfast, Lily decided to go outside and play in the snow, leaving David and Sarah alone in the quiet kitchen. The silence stretched between them, both knowing that the time for small talk had passed. Sarah was the first to speak. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed all of this," she said softly, her gaze drifting to the decorations they'd put up together. "It's strange, being here again." David nodded, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "It's strange for me too, but Lily needed this. She needed to see us together, even if it's just for a few days." Sarah looked down, her face shadowed with regret. "I know I hurt you, David. I hurt both of you. Leaving wasn't an easy choice, but it felt necessary at the time." David felt a surge of old anger, a bitterness that he'd kept locked away. "You didn't just leave me, Sarah. You left Lily. She's been writing letters to you for years, hoping you'd come back." The pain in her eyes was evident, and for a moment, David felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't meant to accuse her, but the words had slipped out, carrying the weight of years of resentment. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And I'll always regret that." But I wasn't. I wasn't the mother she needed back then. I was barely holding myself together. I thought she'd be better off without me. David took a deep breath, his anger fading as he saw the sorrow in her expression. Maybe we both made mistakes. I thought I could shield her from the truth, that if I kept things stable, she'd be okay. But she's been carrying this sadness, this sense of loss, all alone. They sat in silence, each grappling with the choices they'd made, the moments they could never get back. David realized that the anger he'd held onto had been as much a part of his life as the love he'd once shared with Sarah. But in holding onto it, he'd also shut out the possibility of healing. "I want to be there for her now," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. "I can't undo the past, but I can try to make things right, even if it's just in small ways." David nodded, a sense of release washing over him. "She deserves that. We all do." They shared a quiet understanding, a truce that felt both fragile and real. David knew that this moment wouldn't erase the pain of the past, but it was a start, a tentative step toward forgiveness, for Lily's sake and their own. When Lily returned, cheeks red from the cold and eyes bright with joy, she seemed to sense the shift between them. She looked from one parent to the other, her smile widening. "You two look happy," she said innocently, and David couldn't help but smile back, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, despite everything, they could create a Christmas filled with love and understanding, a foundation for Lily's future that didn't rely on the past, but on the promise of something new. The house felt lighter after David and Sarah's conversation, as if a weight had been lifted from the air. They didn't have to say much to one another after that, but there was a quiet understanding between them, a sense that they were both here for Lily, working together in their own ways. Lily, unaware of the delicate shifts happening around her, was simply thrilled to have both her parents under the same roof. She insisted on decorating the Christmas tree together, pulling out boxes of ornaments and tinsel with an energy that filled the room. David and Sarah exchanged glances, both recognizing the importance of this moment and silently agreeing to make it as special as they could for her. "Look, I found the angels," Lily cried, holding up the small, delicate figurine that had topped their tree every Christmas before Sarah had left. David remembered it well, a gift from Sarah when they'd first decorated their tree together as a family. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, her voice soft as she looked at it, memories clearly washing over her. She turned to David with a tentative smile. "Would you like to put it on the tree together?" He hesitated, but Lily's hopeful expression pushed him forward. Together, he and Sarah lifted the angel to the top of the tree, each of them holding onto it as they secured it in place. It was a simple gesture, but one that held a world of meaning. For a moment, they were just a family, united by the memories that had once defined them. Lily clapped her hands in delight, her face glowing with happiness. "It's perfect, just like it used to be." David and Sarah shared a glance, both feeling the weight of her words. The used to be lingered in the air, a reminder of the time they'd lost and the moments they could never reclaim. But they both knew that this was about more than the past. This was about creating a memory that Lily could hold on to, a Christmas that she could look back on with warmth. Afterward, they gathered around the fireplace with mugs of hot chocolate, sharing stories from the past. Lily listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder as they recounted stories from when she was little, filling in gaps that she'd always wondered about. David could see how much it meant to her to hear her parents laughing together, talking about the life they'd once shared. At one point, Lily looked at them, her eyes shining. Do you think we could do this every year?" David and Sarah exchanged a look, each of them feeling the bittersweet weight of her question. They both knew that this reunion was a temporary bridge, one built for Lily's happiness, but also one they'd have to navigate carefully. Sarah leaned forward, taking Lily's hand. "We'll always be a family, Lily. Maybe not in the way we used to be, but we'll always be here for you." Lily nodded, her gaze softening with understanding. "That's all I want." As the evening wound down, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than just a reunion. It was an opportunity to build something new, to create a foundation that would carry them forward, even if they had to let go of what once was. The days leading up to Christmas were filled with a quiet joy, a sense of togetherness that felt both new and familiar. David could see the change in Lily. She seemed more at ease, her laughter ringing out through the house, her spirit lighter than it had been in years. Sarah's presence had filled a void he hadn't been able to fill on his own, and for that, he felt a strange mix of gratitude and melancholy. On Christmas Eve, the three of them attended the town's holiday service, an old tradition they'd once shared. The small chapel was warm and inviting, filled with the soft glow of candlelight and the scent of pine. People greeted them with smiles, clearly pleased to see them together, even if just for a brief time. David felt a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years, as though they were all part of something larger. After the service, they walked through the snow-covered streets, admiring the Christmas lights that adorned the houses. The town was quiet, peaceful, each glowing window a reminder of the families gathered within. David felt a pang of sadness, a reminder of all the years that had slipped away, the life they'd once had but lost. When they returned home, Lily went to bed, leaving David and Sarah alone in the living room. They sat in silence for a while, watching the flickering lights on the tree, each of them lost in their thoughts. Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "It's strange, isn't it? Being here again, like this?" David nodded, his gaze fixed on the tree. "It is. But it feels right too, in a way." For Lily. She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I never wanted to hurt you, David. I never wanted to hurt either of you. But back then, I didn't know how to be the person you both needed me to be." David's chest tightened, old wounds resurfacing. "I know, but it's hard not to think about what might have been if things had been different." Silence settled between them, heavy with the weight of their shared past. David could feel the years of unspoken words, the regrets and missed chances pressing down on him. But he also knew that clinging to that weight would only hold them all back. "We can't change the past," he said quietly, turning to meet her gaze. "But maybe we can find a way to make peace with it." Sarah nodded, a faint, sad smile crossing her lips. "I think I'd like that." They sat together in silence, each of them letting go, little by little, of the memories and pain they'd carried for so long. It wasn't an easy process, but David could feel a sense of release, a quiet acceptance that allowed him to breathe a little easier. When they finally stood to go to bed, Sarah reached out, touching his arm gently. "Thank you, David, for everything, for being there for Lily, for giving me this chance." David looked at her, his voice soft. "She deserves it, and so do you." They parted for the night, both feeling the weight of the past lift slightly, making room for something new. David knew they wouldn't leave this Christmas as the family they'd once been, but maybe they could leave it with a deeper understanding of one another, a sense of peace that would carry them forward. As he lay in bed that night, David felt a quiet contentment settle over him. He realized that, in facing the weight of the past, he'd finally made room for the future, a future where he could be there for Lily, free from the burdens he'd carried for so long. Christmas Eve had settled into a peaceful calm. The house was filled with a sense of warmth and unity, something David hadn't experienced in years. After dinner, they gathered around the tree to exchange a few early gifts, a tradition Lily had suggested, wanting to savor each part of Christmas. As they unwrapped presents, Lily's laughter echoed through the room, her excitement infectious. She handed David a small, neatly wrapped box with a shy smile. "Open it, Dad," she urged. Inside was a handmade ornament, a simple wooden heart with "Dad" carved in it. He felt a lump form in his throat as he looked at the small token, realizing how much this Christmas meant to her, how much she needed this moment of family closeness. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He hugged her tightly, holding on to the joy she'd brought into his life. Then Lily surprised them both. She turned to Sarah with a small box, offering it with a look of hope. "I made one for you too, Mom." Sarah opened it slowly, her eyes filling with tears as she saw a similar heart, carved with the word Mom. She reached out, pulling Lily into her arms. "Thank you, sweetheart. This means the world to me." As they hugged, David felt a shift in the air, a realization that this Christmas was more than just a reunion. It was a chance for all of them to redefine what family could mean, even if it didn't look the way it once had. After Lily went to bed, the house was quiet, filled only with the soft glow of Christmas lights. David and Sarah sat together by the fireplace, each of them lost in thought. Sarah looked at him, her expression vulnerable. "David, do you ever think about what might have happened if we tried harder? If I'd stayed?" David hesitated, caught off guard by her question. It was something he'd thought about countless times over the years, but hearing it from her brought a fresh wave of emotions. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I also know that we can't change what happened. We did what we thought was best, even if it didn't turn out the way we wanted." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the fire. I wish things could have been different, for Lily's sake and for ours." The admission felt like a weight lifting from both of them, a release of the regrets they'd both carried. In that moment, David realized that while they might never be the family they'd once imagined, they could still create something meaningful together for Lily's future. As they sat in silence, the unspoken words between them settled into a quiet acceptance. This Christmas, they'd given Lily and themselves a gift that couldn't be wrapped, the chance to heal, to move forward without the shadows of the past. Christmas morning dawned quietly, a fresh layer of snow blanketing the town. David woke early, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. The house was filled with the scent of coffee and cinnamon, and he could hear Lily humming softly as she arranged the presents under the tree. They gathered together, exchanging smiles and laughter as they unwrapped the gifts they'd chosen for each other. Lily's joy was evident in her wide smile, her delight over every little surprise. David couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude as he watched her, knowing how much this Christmas meant to her. After the gifts were opened and breakfast was finished, Sarah pulled David aside, her face thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what happens after today," she began, her voice soft. "Lily wants us to be together, but I don't want to give her false hope. I think it's time to have a talk with her, an honest one." David nodded, understanding her hesitation. They both knew that this Christmas reunion, while beautiful, was only temporary. They couldn't promise Lily a future that they weren't certain they could give. Together, they found Lily in her room, sitting by the window and watching the snowfall. She looked up when they entered, sensing the seriousness in their expressions. "Lily," Sarah began gently, sitting beside her on the bed, "we wanted to talk to you about something important." Lily's face fell slightly, as if she already knew what was coming. "You're not staying, are you?" Sarah wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Sweetheart, I wish I could, but the life we have now, it's different from what we used to have. Your dad and I will always be here for you, but not in the way we once were." David sat beside them, taking Lily's hand in his. "We love you more than anything, and we'll always be your family. But sometimes, love means letting people be where they're happiest." Lily nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. I just wanted us to be together." Sarah stroked her hair, her voice filled with emotion. "I know, sweetheart. And in a way, we will be. We're always here for you, even if we're not all living in the same place." Lily wiped her eyes, looking from one parent to the other. "Can we still have Christmases together?" David smiled, squeezing her hand. "Of course we can, and we'll make sure to keep making new memories, just like this one." They sat together in silence, holding each other as the snow continued to fall outside. David felt a bittersweet sense of peace, knowing that while he couldn't give Lily the perfect family she longed for, he could give her something just as meaningful, the promise of unwavering love and support, no matter where life took them. In that quiet moment, he made a silent vow to be there for her, to show her that family didn't always mean the same thing to everyone, but that love was the foundation they could all rely on. As the day went on, the weight of the decision settled over the house. It wasn't easy, and he knew it would take time for Lily to fully understand. But he felt hopeful that they'd given her something real, something honest and enduring that she could carry with her through the years. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Your support means the world and helps us bring you more heartfelt stories. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments which part of the story impacted you the most. Was it the reunion, the bittersweet Christmas moments, or maybe the journey of healing? Plus, we're always looking to bring new stories to life. Let us know what kind of stories you'd like to see next. Whether it's more family dramas, holiday tales, or something entirely new, your suggestions are always welcome. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.